In a city of more than 2.7 million people, where the budget of the police service is over $1 billion a year, it is a serious undertaking indeed to sit as chair of the Toronto Police Services Board. Alok Mukherjee held that position for nearly 10 years, enduring such controversial events as the G20 in 2010, the debates over carding, and a number of high-profile police shootings. He documents those years and his efforts as the civilian overseer of Canada's largest municipal police service in his new book. It's called Excessive Force: Toronto's Fight to Reform City Policing. It was written with journalist Tim Harper. Alok Mukherjee is now a distinguished visiting professor at Ryerson University, and he joins us now on policing, past, present, and future. Good to have you in that chair.
It's a pleasure to be.
Thank you for coming in. I enjoyed the book very much. You were chair of the Police Services Board for 10 years, so you are ideally positioned to give us the answer to this first question. What's the mission of the board?
The mission of the board is to provide overall management for the police force, ensure the delivery of adequate and effective policing services, form all policies that govern policing in the city, approve the police budget, appoint a chief, deputy chiefs, and be the employer for the entire police force.
If I asked the police chief, who was the main guy during your time, that same question, would he agree with that answer? Blair.
Bill Blair would agree with that.
He would agree with that answer?
Yes.
Including overall management of the force?
It's in the law. It's written in the law.
It's in the law, but you guys fought a lot over that, right?
Well, because the law also makes a separation between governance through policy making and day-to-day operational management. So, and
because you're supposed to sort of keep your nose out of that, right?
That's right. And so the argument Bill and I used to have was precisely where that line was. And he would say, Chair, your job is to tell me what, my job is to figure out how.
Okay.
But it's through policy providing overall management, that is the board's job.
You brought a human rights, a civil rights background to the position of chair of the Police Services Board. Why did you think the police service in the capital city needed the injection of that lens under you, distinguished from the way it had been in the past?
Yes. I was in 1990s chair of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and I saw how many complaints were coming forward involving the police from members of the public. Later on, as a member of the Ontario Civilian Police Commission, I saw some of the issues related to policing. And it seemed to me that although the Police Act says that policing will be consistent with Human Rights Code and the Charter, that was not always the case.
You found that not to be true?
Not to be true. And if you may recall, in the late 1990s, early 2000, the press started asking questions about racial profiling, about differential policing of racialized people, black people, and so on. So it seemed to me that there was need for a really close look at policing through the human rights lens.
So you tried, I presume you tried, I mean, you've chronicled in the book, to kind of bring that lens to the police service. What kind of pushback did you get when you tried to do that?
None initially. This was very interesting. Both the new chief, Bill Blair, and I found that we were dealing with numerous human rights complaints. The very first complaint that I settled, it was a big complaint that went back several years, was by the transgendered community. In the 90s, the police had raided a bathhouse called Pussy Palace, which was for women and transgendered women. And there was massive violation of human rights. So my first job after joining the board was to negotiate that settlement.
Did you consider Chief Blair an ally in your cause?
Very much in those early years.
Afterwards, maybe more of an impediment?
Afterwards, I think there was so much crisis management that he needed to do in the aftermath of G20 and then the Sammy Yatim and those events as they unfolded.
I should just say Sammy Yatim was the young fella on the streetcar.
On the streetcar.
Very in mental distress, who was
yes.
Fatally shot by a police
right.
officer.
Yeah. So the reactions to those developments distracted the chief from continuing on the course that we had started. Secondly, the follow-up reports in the media on random stops of racialized people, black people, etc., carding, showed that instead of going down, the numbers had gone up. So that frustrated the board, and that caused some serious argument between the board and the service.
I'm trying to get a picture here of, I mean, I understand, Mayor John Tory has said this himself, there's a built-in tension to the relationship between the board chair and the chief of police.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the way it is. It's almost supposed to be that way.
Yes.
But I can't help but conclude from reading your book that the tension between you two was way more than is expected to be built into that relationship. Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say it happened. Didn't happen in the beginning. Both Chief Blair and I used to use the phrase creative tension, that's a built-in feature of our relationship. And as long as the tension was creative, the results would be good. We engaged in free conversation, debates. The chief used to come down to my office in those early years after work, and we would sit for several hours thinking about this city, about all that. But the results of all we were trying to do raised serious questions.
Well, at what point did you think to yourself, this guy actually is not an ally in the cause, he's there to frustrate the will of the board?
I think that concern began to develop about 4 or 5 years into Blair's and my term. So I would say around 2010. And on the one hand, there were all these issues in terms of police interaction with members of the public, particularly the minority. On the other hand, we were also, as a board, pushing much harder on the cost of policing issue, which basically meant we accepted the city's target of reducing the police budget by 10%.
And that frustrated Mr. Blair.
That frustrated Mr. Blair hugely because he felt that he was running a very tight ship, very efficient ship. Year after year, he had been returning millions of dollars. And our point was, if you were returning millions of dollars, then surely there is room here for doing something. We negotiated with the city that we won't do 10% reduction in 1 year. City granted us permission to do it over 2 years. Unfortunately, in the first year, we got some cooperation from the chief. Second round of cuts got no cooperation. Well, and I think that deepened the disagreement between him and the board.
I think pretty clearly the most controversial thing that happened in your joint tenure, yours and Chief Blair's, were the events related to the 2010 G20 Summit that took place in Toronto.
Yes.
When you learned that the federal government, the Harper government, had made the decision to have the leaders of the 20 most important countries in the world, I shouldn't say that, 20 richest countries in the world, come to Toronto, what was your first thought about that?
That it was an imposition, and it's going to cause problems. An event which we did not invite, which the city did not invite, a location which we didn't, as a city, we didn't have any say over. But everybody agreed that it was not the best location for this event to happen.
Did you have any sense that the worst civil rights violations, perhaps in the history of the city, would take place because of the G20 coming to town?
The thought did not occur to us. What we did know, having watched G20s and other summits around the world, that there was always the potential for protests, marches, etc. And our view was that in this city we have a culture of facilitating expression of dissent. And the mayor at the time, Mr. Miller, and I met with media from around the globe, and we assured them that that's the culture of this city. As long as the protests are lawful and peaceful, we will in fact facilitate them.
That didn't happen.
That didn't happen.
You know, I don't want to be apocalyptic about this, Dr. Mukherjee, because the fact is we've seen G20s in other cities around the world.
Yes.
I remember going to Seattle myself 30 years ago or so to cover tens of millions of dollars of damage there and numerous injuries. I mean, nobody died here. Yeah. But lots of people got arrested who shouldn't have been arrested. There were peaceful protesters who got hauled off in what they used to call paddy wagons. I don't know what you call them now. It was not the finest hour for policing in this city.
Absolutely not.
But my question is, has anything changed as a result of that? Because I got lots of critics telling me that, you know, everything's still going along the same old bad way.
I do not believe so.
Okay.
Which doesn't mean that we couldn't have a repeat, or another city which gets a federal event of that magnitude may not face a repeat of what happened here. Because we're talking about policing culture, the context of militarization, concern about national security, and all the rest of it. But for us, I think one of the big problems was that within a matter of hours, we had thousands of police officers from all over the country who had not worked as a team, who were not brought up under the same policies, who did not have the same strategies. And as it turned out, later on, they were not even given proper training for working together. Yeah. It was a couple of hours of briefing and an online video that they were shown, and they were all under the impression that bad things could happen here. So the response was
disproportionate.
We had been taken, me and other board members, to see the detention center, and I was given a full tour by the superintendent in charge of the detention center. In their mind, they had created a good facility which would be humane. They had put in place systems which would ensure a very smooth flow through of people being booked and then spending a few hours at most, bank of telephones with a list of lawyers that they could call if they needed to, and a staging area where people who come to receive them as they come out of the detention center could hold a rally. That was their thinking. Of course, it didn't work out that way. And they had not in their planning anticipated the thousands of people who will end up there, and the whole system collapsed. And what we have is massive violations of people's rights.
You had massive violations of people's rights and probably a tiny handful of cops who at the end of the day actually got punished, and not all that much for what happened.
That's right.
You satisfied with that?
No, which brought out in a very stark way what I call the elaborate illusion of accountability in the book.
Well, let's do one example. I mean, it is the law, or it is both the practice and the law, I think, for police officers to wear their name badges.
Yes.
How many took their badges off during that?
Approximately 100.
100. What was the sanction against them for doing so?
They got an informal discipline of 1 day off.
Unpaid?
Unpaid.
And when you raised this with the chief, what was his reaction?
His reaction was that that was proportionate.
What did you think?
To the offense. Not only I, members of the board were quite frustrated by that, because they believed that this was one of the main board policies and every police officer was obliged to follow it because it's a mandatory policy. So my action was that I was not satisfied, but under the law, the board cannot direct the chief as to what would be the punishment. So what we did, and my board supported me, is that when these officers came up for reclassification, which meant that if one is a constable class 4, to be reclassified to class 3, which the law says should happen after 12 months.
And they get a little raise for that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What'd you do?
I withheld their reclassification.
And what did the chief think of that?
Chief could not do anything about it because...
But he wasn't happy.
We were the employer. And we put the onus back on the chief that once they had been held back for whatever period of time, my initial decision was to hold them back for 6 months, but it went to Labor Board and eventually it became 3 months, but that's okay.
You made your point.
I made my point. And I put the onus back on the chief, that the chief has to certify in each individual case that the individual understood the board policy, appreciated the negative consequence of his or her action, and that they will never do it again.
But it does, I'm going to set this up by saying the following. There is a black chief of police for the Toronto Police Service now.
Yes.
They've had a decade of your human and civil rights approach at the board level.
Yes.
There is presumably more training and certainly more awareness nowadays for members of the police service in dealing with racialized communities and dealing with people in mental health distress. All of that having been said, and of course a huge debate over carding, which we still have to get to.
Yes.
Is it fair to say today that the police services of this country in general and this city in particular are more aware of the better way to do that job?
I think they're more aware, but my question is, why is dealing with mental health a police responsibility in the first place?
Should be a social service responsibility.
Should be a social service responsibility. I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit because at the end of the book I talk about a way forward. We have to question seriously the model by which we are policed. The public police is one component of it, but there are other ways in which we are policed, and yet there is no coordination, no comprehensive governance and oversight. There is no conversation about why some of these matters that are related to health, poverty, homelessness, etc., need to be policing matters.
Yeah.
We need to define better the role of the public police. And then we have to think about who else can better handle those issues.
Sure. Let's talk about street checks, carding as it is known. It is a fact that a disproportionate number of racialized communities are approached by the police, questioned, interrogated, have their personal information taken down,
Yes.
and kept in a police computer somewhere.
Yeah.
That is a fact.
Yeah.
At a recent leaders' debate focused on black issues, Premier Wynne showed up, NDP leader Horwath showed up, Green leader Schreiner showed up, Doug Ford, the PC leader, was not there. But Horwath and Schreiner both said, if I win the election, carding is dead. We end it and we rip up all the records. Mm-hmm. Premier Wynne said, that makes a nice soundbite, but the story's a little more complicated than that. We have to allow police to follow the leads they think are reasonable and do their jobs. Mm-hmm. She's obviously not a fan of discrimination, but she said it's not as simple as my two opponents are making it sound.
Yeah.
Who's right?
I think the Premier is closer to the truth. When people say stop carding, I think most of the time they're talking about a system by which information gathered through random stops is stored in police database or in the police officer's memo book. That practice may well be able to be stopped, but the police will say part of their job depends on gathering information, and I think that's the distinction that Premier Wynne is making, mm-hmm. that while you can stop a practice, which the government has tried to do with its regulation, you cannot stop the police from gathering information. What we said in Toronto when we tried to develop a policy before the provincial regulation is you should have the ability to gather information in the course of an investigation. But you have no business gathering data and putting it in your computers about people who are not engaged in any activity, criminal activity, that are not suspected of any wrongdoing. You have no business storing data about innocent people. So yes, you need to gather information, but gather information for valid public safety purposes.
Okay, a couple of minutes to go here, and I want to raise two more things. Can a board chair of a police services board be effective if the members of the force over which you have oversight basically think you're hostile to their interests? And I put it to you that I think most of the members of the Toronto Police Service thought you were hostile to their interests.
They didn't think so initially, but when I started asking deeper questions about our model of policing, the break point is 2010, 2011, I wrote a paper for the police board on a different model for policing.
And you got in trouble for that.
I got into trouble for that.
Because you didn't seek the board's approval. You just kind of freelanced that one, didn't you?
That's right.
Yes.
And the good thing is that that paper received wide circulation nationally and became a blueprint for conversation across the country, including the National Summit on Economics of Policing and so on.
But you had to apologize for it. You got your wrist slapped too.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. And but that's part of, I think, the way in which you move a discussion forward. And I had very heated conversations with McCormack, the president of the Police Association, on the fact that, Mike, we cannot go on the way things were. We have tried all these different softer measures, conversation and dialogue and refining systems, etc. But at the end, I have come to the belief that unless we engage in a transformative change process, we will not get the results, either in terms of better service or in terms of controlling the cost of policing.
Did he agree with that?
No.
He did not?
No. And that's when they began to see me as a not very friendly chair of the police service.
In which case, could you, was your effectiveness, cut down significantly by that fact?
As long as the board was on my side, as long as the public continued to engage in that conversation, I could have carried on. But the board is a very political beast.
You're all political appointees, basically,
We are
aren't you?
political
by
appointees.
the province, by the city.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there's an internal politics, and there are huge interests involved more broadly, from the city hall, from the government, and so on. And as long as you're able to negotiate that political thicket, you can do your job. By the way, there is no place where the job is written down. The Police Service Act simply says every board will appoint a chair at the first meeting of the year. Doesn't say what the chair will do. So I basically, over 10 years, carved out my own job.
Let's finish up on this. I want to come full circle and talk about your relationship with Bill Blair, who now, of course, is a Liberal MP and I guess somewhat ironically is the person responsible for bringing in legalization of marijuana. After having read, what are we here, more than 250 pages of the book, much of which focuses on your tempestuous relationship with Bill Blair, you do tell us that when the board declined to renew his contract, which he wanted, you felt sad about him leaving. You regretted it at some level. Why?
I continue to think of him as a good man who cared for the city, who worked by his own lights to the extent that he could make change. And the basis on which the board agreed not to renew his contract was that we need to enter into the next phase of change, and we need to have a chief who can build on Blair's legacy. So I felt sad the day he left, and he was in the lobby, and people were giving him a send-off. I came down from my office, and he quite spontaneously gave me a hug. And then it was like an emotional moment when he is marched out of the office with the police band and people lined up. Because he did have an impact on the city. He did do some good things in the beginning, in the first 5 years of his tenure. And from the conversations he and I had, he cared for this city. It's a different our disagreements were not on those things. So I felt sad for him leaving as a human being. But I also understood intellectually that there's work to be done to build on where we were.
And that job now falls to the next group.
Exactly.
And we thank you, not only with Tim Harper for writing Excessive Force, Toronto's Fight to Reform City Policing. It's a terrific read. People won't agree with everything you wrote in here, but it's still made an important contribution to understanding these issues a lot.
Thank you.
So thank you for coming in and sharing your views on this.
My pleasure.
Dr. Alok Mukherjee.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.